Welcome to channel. In today's video, we dive into the timeless classic, The Time Machine by H.G.Wells. Join us as we explore the groundbreaking journey of the time traveler who ventures far into the future to discover the fate of humanity and the mysteries of time itself. From the idyllic world of the Eloi to the dark underworld of the Morlocks, we'll break down the key themes, fascinating characters, and the profound questions this novel raises about progress, society, and the human condition. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more literary adventures. Let's get started. The Time Machine by H.G.Wells. The book was total pneuma of 107 pages. In Chapter 1 of The Time Machine, the narrative continues with the time traveler explaining the principles behind his machine. He asserts that any real object must exist in the fourth dimension, time, and that just as we move through space, we should theoretically be able to move through time. His listeners, including Philby, the psychologist, the medical man, and the provincial mayor, react with varying degrees of incredulity and fascination. The time traveler argues that time is simply another dimension, like length, breadth, and height, and that our inability to move freely in time is a limitation of our consciousness, not of time itself. He uses a weather record as an example, showing how the movement of the barometer's mercury over time creates a line that represents its journey through the time dimension. When the psychologist questions why we can't move through time as we do through space, the time traveler suggests that we are always moving through time at a steady rate, from birth to death. He compares this to the limited vertical movement of humans before the invention of balloons, implying that technological advancements could eventually allow us to navigate time more freely. The time traveler then introduces a small model of his time machine made of metal, ivory, and a crystalline substance. He explains that pressing one lever sends the machine into the future, while the other reverses its motion. After ensuring there is no trickery, he has the psychologist activate the model, which vanishes in front of the group, leaving them stunned. The demonstration leaves the group in awe and disbelief. The time traveler reassures them of his sincerity and reveals that he has built a larger version of the machine, nearly complete, in his laboratory. He intends to use this machine to explore time himself. Despite their skepticism, the guests follow him to the laboratory, where they see the larger machine, partially assembled with parts of nickel, ivory, and rock crystal. The chapter ends with the group still unsure whether to believe the time traveler's claims, but their curiosity is piqued. The time traveler's conviction and the tangible evidence of his machine leave them intrigued, setting the stage for the unfolding adventure and exploration of time. In Chapter 2 of The Time Machine, the narrator reflects on the general skepticism among the time traveler's guests about his invention. The time traveler is seen as too clever and whimsical, leading to distrust. Even after witnessing the demonstration of the model time machine, the guests remain doubtful and preoccupied with how the trick might have been done. The narrator describes another gathering the following Thursday, where the time traveler is noticeably absent. As the guests speculate about his whereabouts, he suddenly appears in a disheveled and exhausted state, with his clothes and appearance suggesting he has been through a rough ordeal. His sudden arrival and haggard look shock the guests. The time traveler, after briefly greeting them, asks for food and drink, showing signs of severe hunger and fatigue. He mentions having had an extraordinary experience, but insists on eating before explaining anything further. Despite the guest's curiosity and attempts to understand his condition, he remains focused on his meal. After dinner, the group moves to the smoking room, where the time traveler begins to recount his adventure. He insists on telling his story without interruptions, emphasizing its truth despite its unbelievable nature. He claims to have lived through 8 days of incredible experiences since he was last in his laboratory at 4 o'clock. The chapter ends with the time traveler starting to narrate his story, captivating his audience despite their initial skepticism. In Chapter 3 of The Time Machine, the time traveler recounts his first journey through time. He explains how, after some delays due to a minor mechanical issue, he completed the time machine and began his voyage at 10 o'clock that morning. Initially, He experienced a disorienting sensation of falling and doubted whether anything had happened. But the clock revealed that hours had passed in an instant. He then fully engaged the lever, causing time to accelerate rapidly. As he travelled, he witnessed the rapid passage of days and nights, seeing the sun and moon streak across the sky. The scenery outside his laboratory changed swiftly, with buildings rising and falling, and the landscape altering dramatically. The sensation of time travel was unpleasant and disorienting, like a continuous, headlong motion. Over time, the rapid alternation of light and dark blended into a continuous greyness, with the sky taking on a deep blue hue. He observed the changing seasons and the transformation of the landscape, eventually travelling so fast that the sun appeared as a continuous streak of fire. Despite the initial discomfort, he felt a growing exhilaration and curiosity about the future. The time traveller became anxious about stopping, fearing a catastrophic collision with an object occupying the same space as his machine. Despite these fears, he impulsively decided to stop and was thrown through the air, landing on soft turf in the midst of a hailstorm. As the hailstorm cleared, he found himself in a garden with a large, weathered white statue resembling a winged sphinx. Filled with a mix of fear and curiosity, he examined his surroundings, noticing massive buildings and lush greenery. His anxiety about encountering future beings heightened until he saw a group of small, frail, and beautifully dressed people approaching him. Reassured by their appearance, he felt a renewed sense of confidence. In Chapter 4 of The Time Machine, of H.G.Wells's The Time Machine, continuing from the initial impressions, the time traveller delves deeper into his observations and theories about the Eloi and their society. 1. Eloi's fragility and lack of fear. The time traveller is struck by the Eloi's fragility and lack of fear, noting their gentle, childlike behaviour. They are physically weak and intellectually simplistic, a stark contrast to his expectations of advanced future humans. 2. Communication difficulties. Despite initial challenges in communication due to their soft and cooing language, the traveller begins to learn some basic words. The Eloi find his attempts at their language amusing, indicating their limited attention span and lack of sustained interest. 3. Physical environment. The traveller describes a world that is a vast, neglected garden, with beautiful but untended flora. There are no small houses, only large palace-like structures in varying states of decay, indicating a past civilization that has deteriorated over time. 4. Social structure and lifestyle. The traveller theorizes that the Eloi's society is a form of communism, with no apparent distinctions between individuals based on sex or social roles. They lead a leisurely life, dining on fruit and engaging in playful activities, with no evidence of labour or conflict. 5. Decline of human vitality. The traveller speculates that the Eloi represent humanity in decline, weakened by the elimination of hardship and the need for physical and intellectual exertion. The comforts and securities achieved by their ancestors have led to a loss of strength and intelligence. 6. The concept of security leading to weakness. He reflects on the idea that strength and intelligence are products of necessity and struggle. In the absence of challenges, the Eloi have become weak and indolent, highlighting the paradox that the very achievements aimed at improving life have ultimately led to degeneration. 7. Nature's balance altered. The traveller notes the absence of diseases, pests, and wild animals, suggesting that humanity has successfully controlled nature. However, this control has also removed the natural pressures that drive evolution and adaptation. 8. A world in ruins. The traveller observes numerous ruins and dilapidated structures, symbols of a once great civilization now fallen into disrepair. This physical decay mirrors the Eloi's own degeneration. 9. Speculation on population control. He theorizes that population control measures might have been overly effective, leading to a decline in numbers and the abandonment of buildings. This reflects his broader understanding of the Eloi's society as one that has stagnated and regressed. 10. Reflection on civilizational arc. The traveller contemplates the trajectory of human civilization, recognizing that the Eloy's current state might be the inevitable result of a long period of peace and security. This reflection underscores the theme of change and the unintended consequences of technological and social progress. 11. Nature's beauty and humanity's impact. Despite the Eloy's decline, the natural world remains beautiful and abundant, a testament to humanity's past efforts to cultivate and improve it. The traveller appreciates the aesthetic achievements, but laments the loss of vitality and purpose. 12. Foreshadowing future discoveries. The chapter hints at future discoveries and experiences that will further challenge the traveller's understanding of the world and its inhabitants. His initial theory, while plausible, is acknowledged as incomplete, setting the stage for deeper revelations. Through these detailed observations and reflections, the time traveller provides a rich and nuanced depiction of the Eloys and their world, raising profound questions about the nature of progress, the role of struggle in human development, and the potential consequences of achieving a utopian society. In Chapter 5 of The Time Machine, in this excerpt, the time traveller recounts his troubling experience after realizing his time machine has disappeared. While exploring a distant future, he stands under the full moon, noting the eerie stillness and the presence of the white Sphinx statue. As panic sets in, he races down a slope, fearing he might be trapped in this alien world forever. Despite his desperate search and frantic attempts to locate the time machine, it remains missing, leaving him with a profound sense of loss and helplessness. In his frantic search, he interrogates the small, childlike inhabitants of this future world, who seem incapable of understanding his distress. His efforts to retrieve the machine lead him to suspect it is hidden inside the pedestal of the white Sphinx, but his attempts to open it are futile. Over time, the time traveller becomes more methodical, deciding to learn about this strange society. He observes their simple, idyllic lives, but notes an unsettling lack of old or infirm individuals. This discovery, combined with the mysterious wells and towers he encounters, suggests an unseen complexity beneath the surface of this seemingly utopian world. During his stay, the time traveller rescues one of the small creatures, a female named Weena, from drowning. This act of kindness leads to a unique friendship, offering him some solace amidst his growing anxiety. Despite his efforts to adapt and understand, the mystery of the missing time machine and the true nature of this future society continue to haunt him. This passage highlights the blend of wonder and terror in the time traveller's journey, underscoring themes of isolation, the unknown, and the fragility of human achievement. The passage describes the narrator's relationship with Weena, a childlike creature who clings to him with great affection and fear. Despite his initial irritation at her constant presence, he eventually finds comfort in her companionship. Weena's fear of the dark reveals a significant detail about her world. The people, including Weena, are terrified of the night and always seek safety in numbers and light. The narrator also recounts his experiences with mysterious, ghostly white figures that he encounters at dawn. These figures, which he later identifies as Morlocks, represent a second, subterranean species of humans. His discovery of these creatures leads him to theorize about the evolution and division of humanity into two distinct species: the Eloi, who live above ground in a seemingly idyllic but intellectually and physically diminished state, and the Morlocks, who dwell underground and maintain the machinery that supports the Eloy's lifestyle. The narrator's exploration and confrontation with the Morlocks reveal their adaptations to underground life, such as their pale skin and large eyes. His theory suggests that social and economic disparities in his own time have evolved into a more extreme division of the human race. This realization shifts his perception of humanity's future from one of utopian cooperation to one of stark class stratification and degeneration. Weena's inability to discuss the Morlocks and her emotional distress when pressed further underscore the terror that these underground dwellers evoke among the Eloi. The narrator's initial frustration with Weena transforms into a protective instinct as he seeks to comfort her and shield her from the harsh realities of their world. In Chapter 6 of The Time Machine, the narrator begins by explaining that it took him 2 days to muster the courage to explore the underground world of the Morlocks. His initial aversion is partly due to the Morlocks' resemblance to preserved specimens in a museum and their cold, clammy touch. Additionally, the Eloy's fear and disgust of the Morlocks influence his own feelings. During these 2 days, the narrator experiences restless nights filled with perplexity, doubt, and an inexplicable sense of fear. He spends time exploring above ground, attempting to distract himself from the looming task of retrieving his time machine from the Morlock's lair. One day, he notices a vast green structure resembling Chinese porcelain, which piques his curiosity. However, he recognizes that his interest in this palace of green porcelain is a way to avoid facing the Morlocks. Resolving to confront his fear, he sets out early the next morning with Weena, a small Eloy who has become attached to him. At the well, Weena tries to stop him, but he gently brushes her aside and begins his descent. The climb down the well is arduous and terrifying, with metallic bars barely supporting his weight. At one point, a bar bends under his weight, nearly causing him to fall into the darkness below. After a grueling descent, he finds a narrow horizontal tunnel where he can rest. Here, he encounters 3 Morlocks, who flee from the light of his match. These creatures, adapted to perpetual darkness, have large, sensitive eyes. The narrator continues to explore, despite his fear, and discovers a vast cavern filled with machinery and the smell of blood. He realizes the Morlocks are carnivorous and wonders what large animals they could be consuming. As he navigates the cavern, he becomes acutely aware of his lack of preparation, no weapons, medicine, or even enough matches. When his last match burns out, he feels the Morlock's hands examining him in the dark, which is profoundly unsettling. He shouts to scare them off, but they soon return, whispering and clutching at him. In a desperate move, he strikes another match to create a brief respite and makes his way back to the narrow tunnel. The Morlocks pursue him, and in the ensuing struggle, he uses his last match. Despite the danger, he manages to find the climbing bars and begins the arduous ascent. The climb is exhausting, and he battles nausea and dizziness. Eventually, he emerges into the sunlight, where he collapses and is comforted by Weena and the other Eloy before losing consciousness. This chapter highlights the narrator's inner turmoil, bravery, and the stark contrast between the idyllic world of the Eloy and the dark, mechanical underworld of the Morlocks. It underscores his growing understanding of the future world's complexities and the harsh realities hidden beneath its surface. In Chapter 7 of The Time Machine, the narrator finds himself in a more precarious situation than before. Initially, he had hoped for eventual escape, but his discoveries about the Morlocks, a sinister, inhuman race, fill him with dread. The Eloy, once thought to be an aristocracy served by the Morlocks, are revealed to be helpless and fearful of the dark, as the Morlocks have become the dominant species. The narrator realizes that the Morlocks maintain the Eloy for a sinister purpose. The fear of the dark nights, mentioned by Weena and Eloy, suggests that the Morlocks hunt during these moonless nights. This deepens the narrator's horror as he recalls seeing meat in the Morlock's lair, hinting at cannibalism. Determined to defend himself, he resolves to create weapons and a secure place to sleep. The narrator, with Weena in tow, heads towards the Palace of Green Porcelain, a structure he hopes will provide refuge. The journey is arduous due to the distance and his worn shoes. They arrive at the palace by nightfall, and as the evening deepens, the narrator becomes acutely aware of the dangers posed by the Morlocks. He decides to rest on an open hill rather than risk the dense woods, reflecting on the stars and the vast changes humanity has undergone. Throughout the night, the narrator remains vigilant, pondering the fate of humanity and the relationship between the Eloy and Morlocks. The dawn brings a sense of safety, and he resolves to find fire and weapons, seeing the Eloy as victims of a harsh evolutionary punishment. The chapter concludes with the narrator's determination to rescue Weena and retrieve his time machine, facing the future with a blend of scientific curiosity and a protective instinct. In this chapter 7 of The Time Machine by H.G.Wells, the time traveller discovers the Palace of Green Porcelain, a dilapidated and deserted structure. Upon exploring, he realizes it is a vast, ancient museum containing remnants of various eras and subjects, including paleontology, natural history, and technology. He observes extinct creatures' fossils and various decayed exhibits, hinting at the museum's grandeur in the past. Inside the palace, he finds tools that may help him survive and protect against the Morlocks, like a lever he breaks off to use as a weapon. He also discovers a box of matches and camphor, valuable for starting fires and providing light. As night approaches, he decides to spend it in the open, protected by a fire, and plans to retrieve his time machine the following day. Throughout the exploration, Weena, a small creature from the future, accompanies him, adding a human element to his otherwise solitary and grim journey. Despite his discoveries, he faces challenges and setbacks. For instance, he finds dynamite, cartridges in airtight cases, only to realize they are dummies and cannot be used. This disappointment underscores the decay and futility of relying on past technologies in his desperate situation. As dusk approaches, the time traveller and Weena find a small open courtyard within the palace, where they decide to rest and prepare for the night. He plans to use his matches and camphor as defences against the Morlocks, realizing they might be his best protection in the darkness. The chapter showcases the time traveller's resourcefulness and adaptability as he navigates this strange and dangerous future world. It also highlights the stark contrast between the grand achievements of humanity's past, symbolized by the museum's remnants, and the bleakness of its future, overrun by subterranean creatures and decay. In Chapter 9 of The Time Machine by H.G.Wells, the time traveller and Weena emerge from the Palace of Green Porcelain just before sunset. Determined to reach the White Sphinx by morning, the time traveller plans to push through the woods ahead, gathering firewood along the way to build a protective fire for the night. However, their progress is slow, and both he and Weena grow weary and sleepy. As they approach the edge of a wood, the time traveller senses danger and presses on despite their fatigue. He gathers enough firewood to build a blaze and decides to light it as a defense against the Morlocks, who he feels are closing in on them. He manages to light a fire, which initially gives them some protection, but it inadvertently draws the attention of the Morlocks. In the darkness, surrounded by shrubs and long grass, the time traveller and Weena become aware of the Morlocks' presence. He uses his matches to keep them at bay temporarily, but soon realizes he's turned around and lost their direction in the woods. Exhausted and disoriented, he tries to build another fire, but falls asleep. When he wakes, the fire has gone out, and the Morlocks attack. A fierce struggle ensues, with the time traveller using his iron lever to fend off the Morlocks who try to overwhelm him. Just as he is about to be overcome, a wildfire sparked by his earlier fire spreads through the forest, driving the Morlocks away. In the chaos, he glimpses the Morlocks' vulnerability and their fear of fire. Amidst the fire and confusion, the time traveller searches for Weena but cannot find her. He watches as the Morlocks, blinded by the light and heat, stumble helplessly around him. Eventually, morning breaks, and he sees the Palace of Green Porcelain in the distance. Saddened by Weena's disappearance, he sets off towards the White Sphinx, his emotions torn between grief and a newfound determination. This chapter underscores the precariousness of the time traveller's situation in the future world, where survival hinges on his wits and the remnants of human technology. His encounter with the Morlocks reveals both their predatory nature and their vulnerabilities, setting the stage for further explorations and revelations in the narrative. In Chapter 10 of The Time Machine by H.G.Wells, the time traveller returns to the seat of yellow metal where he had first arrived in the future world. He reflects bitterly on his initial optimism about the peaceful and beautiful surface world, now understanding the hidden horrors beneath. He observes the Eloi, realizing they live a carefree existence akin to cattle, oblivious to danger and with no defenses against the Morlocks who prey on them. As he approaches the White Sphinx, he finds its bronze doors unexpectedly open, revealing his time machine inside a small chamber. Surprised by this apparent surrender of the Sphinx, he discards his iron bar and steps inside. There, he discovers that the Morlocks have cleaned and oiled the time machine, possibly trying to understand its workings. As he examines the time machine, the bronze doors suddenly close, trapping him in darkness. The Morlocks, anticipating his capture, close in on him, and he frantically tries to light a match to operate the time machine. However, he realizes too late that the matches only light on the box, not when struck elsewhere. In the dark, he fights off the Morlocks with his lever, struggling to find and operate the machine's levers to escape. Finally, with the Morlocks almost overpowering him, he manages to activate the time machine. The darkness lifts, and he finds himself back in the future world's grey light and chaos, relieved to have escaped their grasp. The chapter ends with the time traveller's return to the surface, setting the stage for his final departure from the year 802,701 AD. This chapter continues to explore the contrast between the seemingly idyllic surface world and the brutal reality of the Morlocks' underground existence, emphasizing the time traveller's growing understanding of the future's complexities and dangers. In Chapter 12 of The Time Machine by H.G.Wells, the time traveller continues his journey into the distant future, now propelled forward at an accelerating pace due to a mistake in manipulating the time machine's levers. He observes the gradual changes in the Earth's environment as he moves forward in time. Initially, he notices that the alternations of day and night become slower, eventually almost ceasing altogether. The sun itself changes, growing larger and redder until it stops moving across the sky and remains fixed on the horizon, its light dimming. The moon disappears entirely, replaced by a steady twilight and occasional comets in the sky. Arriving in a time when the Earth has come to rest, with one face permanently turned towards the sun, much like the moon's relationship to Earth, he finds himself on a desolate beach. The atmosphere is thin and oppressive, the sky a dark red, and the landscape dominated by harsh reddish rocks and strange, intense green vegetation that thrives in perpetual twilight. As he explores further, he encounters monstrous creatures resembling giant crabs, some as large as tables, crawling slowly along the beach. These creatures, along with the barren, alien landscape and the eerie silence, contribute to an overwhelming sense of desolation and decay. Continuing his journey through time, the time traveller witnesses the gradual freezing of the Earth's oceans, with ice forming along the shores and a bitter cold settling over the landscape. Despite the desolation, he detects faint signs of life in the form of green slime and occasional glimpses of moving objects, though these turn out to be misleading. The chapter climaxes with the onset of a solar eclipse, where either the moon or another planet passes in front of the sun, plunging the Earth into total darkness. The eclipse brings an intense, cold and eerie silence, extinguishing even the faintest remnants of life sounds that might have remained. Overwhelmed by the darkness and cold, the time traveller struggles to maintain his composure, haunted by a sense of horror and impending doom. This chapter vividly portrays the far future evolution of Earth into a bleak and inhospitable environment, highlighting Wells' imaginative vision of cosmic and geological transformations over immense spans of time. In Chapter 22 of The Time Machine by H.G.Wells, the time traveller returns from his journey through time, profoundly affected by his experiences. Initially disoriented and physically shaken, he gradually regains his senses as he observes the familiar signs of his own time, the sun, the sky, and the landscape around him returning to normal. He slows down the time machine, marking the exact spot where he had departed from and arrived back in his laboratory. Upon his return, the time traveller notices a peculiar inversion in the movements of people he encounters, suggesting some subtle alteration in the fabric of time. Despite his physical and emotional exhaustion, he rejoins his skeptical friends in the present, sharing his incredible tale of the future. He acknowledges the disbelief his story may provoke, but asserts its truthfulness, challenging his audience to consider it as either a remarkable truth or a compelling fiction. After a moment of silence and contemplation, the group disperses, each member processing the implications of his account in their own way. The time traveller himself shows signs of doubt, grappling with the reality of his experiences versus the possibility that it was all a vivid dream or delusion. The chapter closes with a surreal scene in the laboratory, where the time machine stands as tangible proof of his journey. Despite lingering doubts and the disbelief of his peers, the time traveller reaffirms the truth of his adventure, though his machine's disappearance shortly after casts a shadow of uncertainty over the tale. Ultimately, the time traveller's departure at the end of the chapter leaves unresolved questions about his fate and the veracity of his extraordinary claims, leaving his friends and readers to ponder the possibility of time travel and the mysteries of existence. This conclusion sets the stage for contemplation on the nature of reality, perception, and the limits of human understanding in Wells's exploration of speculative fiction. In the epilogue of The Time Machine by H.G.Wells, the narrator reflects on the time traveller's disappearance and ponders the possibilities of his fate. He speculates whether the time traveller might have journeyed back into prehistoric eras, encountering primitive humans or ancient creatures like saurians and plesiosaurs. Alternatively, he considers the prospect that the time traveller moved forward in time, witnessing a future where humanity has solved its current problems and evolved beyond its current state of discord and uncertainty. The narrator expresses skepticism about the present era being the pinnacle of human achievement, feeling that it is instead characterized by incomplete theories, experimental endeavors, and societal strife. Despite these doubts, he acknowledges that the time traveller had a pessimistic view of humanity's future, seeing civilization's progress as ultimately self-destructive. Yet, the narrator finds solace in the memory of the time traveller's adventures and the enduring bonds of gratitude and tenderness that transcend time. He keeps 2 shriveled white flowers as mementos, symbols of the human capacity for emotion and connection, even in the face of unknown futures and the mysteries of time travel. The epilogue leaves the reader contemplating the vast unknowns of the future and the enduring qualities of humanity, resonating with themes of curiosity, exploration, and the complexities of human nature explored throughout the novel. Sure, here's a brief and engaging YouTube intro description for a book summary of The Time Machine by H.G.Wells.